The industry is set up in a way that the people at the top with the access to the market make the most money. The way that we've constructed society, we create this hierarchical structure. The food system is extraordinarily extractive, not just to the land, but also to the dignity of the people who are working on the land. There's always something that can be done. And it's hard. But again, what do you want? What do you want for your life? What do you want for yourself? What do you want for your kids? What do you want for generations of kids after you leave this earth? What do you want? I love what you just said, though. You said, is food nourishing? Okay, so I'm putting out a nourishing product to a customer, but am I taking care of my employees? Am I taking care of myself? Am I taking care of my farmers? Are they taking care of the land? Is the food nourishing all the way down to the land? And is the food nourishing through its capital investments, right? So when the money comes in, the idea is for the money to grow, but does that money grow because it's extractive, or does it grow because it's actually nourishing something, because it's actually building and developing something? Dead money, right? Really extractive money. There's no good energy in that. There's no good outcome in that. It's flat, it's extractive. What happiness is in that? Let's all operate from a place of truth and integrity if we're going to actually change this. If any of this is going to be meaningful in the next 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 years, then it has to start somewhere, and it may as well start here.
Welcome to the Future Kind podcast, where conscious nourishment is our guide. From the cellular to the cosmic, we're exploring how our relationship with food has the power to transform the world. Heather Terry, CEO, entrepreneur, food system leader, and honestly, one of the most all-around badass people I know. Welcome to Future Kind.
Thanks, Megan. Thank you for having me.
So our work has woven back and forth for years now, but I'm realizing I don't really know what got you started on your path. And I was talking yesterday with our mutual friend and colleague, Kira, who told me that before food, you were on Broadway. And so I just have to say, I'm really curious to hear about how you got started in your work in food, and also just like FYI, hoping that somehow it ties into the Broadway part of your story.
So I was a professional actor in New York City for 7 years. I did Broadway, I did commercials, I did soap operas. I was on All My Children for a while, actually. And that was my life. I was, in New York doing that. I have a graduate degree in acting from Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers University. It was a great part of my life. It was, that was what I had always dreamed of doing. And then in 2008, the housing crisis happened and work was drying up very rapidly. I had taken an interest in nutrition and food because my father had terminal lymphoma. He was diagnosed when I was 11 years old, and he died when I was 22. And so half of my life with him was in his disease. And, he was at Mayo Clinic, he was at Hopkins, he was going through all the trials that actually a lot of people benefit from today. Interestingly enough, he was in a lot of those clinical trials. And he, in the end, kind of started thinking about food. And kind of started thinking about like, wow, what if food had a connection here, right? Because this is like the 90s into the early 2000s, right? Where we weren't really having this conversation. It was like, what was it called? Like the Hungry Man, microwave meals. And, that was how I grew up, Spam and, all of that. And I think my dad started to kind of put some of those pieces together, and he was talking about it a lot. And I started, cooking and getting curious about what food changes might do in my life. And I started doing that. I was running marathons and half marathons, like the life of an actor it's a really strange life in New York City. And I was doing, I had like these weird hobbies. And then I was, back then, I was publishing a blog and doing all these crazy things. And then I ended up at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition while the house, like just
Oh,
after the
okay.
housing crisis dropped. And I
Mm.
wanted to make sure that I just had other tools. I was equipped with other things. And this was such an interest of mine that I wanted to become educated. So I did that. And instead of going into the health coaching realm, which is what that program is geared toward, I started a food product. And so I started my first company, Nibmore Chocolate, that just closed down actually just this past year. So it had a very, very long run. But the idea there was that, we wanted to create food that was really clean that we could bring into the mainstream. And chocolate was something that my former business partner, Jennifer Love, and I were really passionate about. And we were actually, I think, the first non-GMO project verified chocolate bar in the US. We were evangelists for what you guys were doing. And we just thought it made such sense. And our audience was curious. We had this like niche audience. So it was, I let go of my acting career because the company ended up going and doing something and really, despite my complete and utter ignorance at that point in time, this is 2008. So almost, oh my God, it's like almost 20 years ago. It's like 17 years ago. Jennifer and I did this and we were walking up and down the streets of New York City and trying to get product into retailers. And back then it was like the Westerly Market in Manhattan and, Fairway. And so we were peddling our wares wherever we could and talking about clean food and just, less ingredients, understanding your food, understanding what you're putting in your body and how that really affects you.
That's awesome. I am a big fan of chocolate too. It's a staple of my diet. So I love that that's where you started. Yeah. And then tell us about the evolution from there to now what you're doing with GoodSam.
Yeah, so I exited Nibmore in 2015, and then I was a consultant for a number of years. So I was helping primarily women-owned companies raise capital and get into retail. That was kind of my sweet spot. I knew all the retailers because at Nibmore I had done business with everybody, from the Westerly markets, right, with one location in a place like New York City, all the way through the likes of Whole Foods, Costco, Target, Walmart. I was doing a lot of business with those guys. And so I started helping other companies. I was in the beauty business for a little while, back to food, did a little bit of beverage, which I didn't like. But the beverage category is a whole beast in and of itself. It's like a totally different frequency. And ended up as a consultant at an agency in New York City. And my first client was a husband and wife team who had a supply in Colombia, in Latin America. And they really believed, the wife was Colombian. And she said, I have some inroads with farmers and farming communities, and we want to do dried fruit. And I asked them if they wanted to burn money on the ground. Because, it was a highly, highly commoditized category. And I was in a very traditional model, right? Like you build it to a certain degree. This is how the metrics work. This is the, points of distribution where the margins need to be. Even if you're burning cash, get to this, this part in this objective in revenue, and then look to sell the company. That was the paradigm that I was operating in, right? This like very typical way to do it. And so I took the project on, and for the first 6 months or so, I wasn't sure it was going to make it. I just kind of thought, okay, well, this is interesting, but I'm not sure. And then I went to Colombia and started meeting some of the farmers. And I took Jeremiah McElwee from Thrive Market at the time with me. And Jeremiah and I were on the ground going, oh my gosh, we actually could work directly with these farmers. We could, these ecosystems are virtually untouched. There were indigenous communities, there were smallholder farmers, there were a lot of players that were trying to access the market, and we had the market. And we also started to shift our thinking about how it could work. So that was really fundamental to the first part of what became GoodSam, because it wasn't always called GoodSam. It was something completely different. And then we moved into this this idea about doing business directly with the farmers, and not directly in that, like, oh, I know them, meaning like cash being exchanged, like business understanding their business, them understanding our business, there being a collective table that everybody proverbially sits around and and talks about what they need, what's happening, and where we're all collectively going together. And that was what developed out of that first trip. And it took a long time because I was very stuck in an old narrative. I had people like Jeremiah influencing, and then our Colombian team. We had a few Colombian team members who are still with us, like Saida Abdallah, who really worked on me and were like, "Hey, GI Jane, like, no, I don't think so. We're not going to do it that way. There is nuance here. There is culture here. There is language here. There is, science and ecosystem here, and all of those things have to be considered for you to do what it is that you say you really want to do." And that was key. If you are true about in what you're saying, then it has to be done differently. And I think bringing in that alternative cultural lens very early in the company was what really changed how we started to think, not only about the products that we were going to put on the shelf and the regenerative nature and the team aspects, the justice, the equity piece, and the regenerative piece. But then we started asking ourselves, or at least I started asking myself as the American in the old paradigm, well, if we're going to do business like that and we're going to message business like that, then we have to change the way we do business. That was a huge piece of this. That was the biggest question that I had to ask myself. It was the largest transformation, I think, in the development of the initial business. And that was what, started the fire, right? That brought us to where we are today in what has been the most wild ride of my entire career.
So in that question of like, you really grappling with changing the way we do business, what did that entail? Like, what did you're pointing to like the resource support provocation you had outside of you, but like, what did you have to do inside yourself to be able to rise to the occasion of grappling with that? And what was like the hardest, scariest part about like truly contemplating an actual paradigm shift in how you were doing business?
Yeah. Well, the industry, the fooding industry, works in a really specific way, right? It is set up in a way that the people at the top with the access to the market make the most money, right? And I'm not even, sometimes I am talking about brand in that, and sometimes I'm talking about retailer in that, right? Because it sort of depends on what size company you are. But regardless, even a brand in the United States is going to be making more money than the person who's planting the seed, right? So it's sort of a hallmark of colonialism in that, like, the person who has the ecosystem is viewed as the poorest when they're really not, right? They're actually the richest. Yeah. They're actually the one who controls the system. But the way that we've constructed society, and if I may be so bold, the way the patriarchy is set up in order to do the things that we do in this world, is that we create this hierarchical structure that puts somebody, that exploits one end of the way a system is created to benefit the other end, right? So the food system is set up very much in this capacity. It's set up in a way that is extraordinarily extractive, not just to the land, but also to the dignity of the people who are working on the land, who own the land or are working on the land. Because those are two different things. When you own land and when you're working on the land, sometimes that's, yes, the same, but sometimes those are actually two separate things. And there's a lot of nuances in that. But I think for me, I had been in the field before, Megan. I had when I had Nibmore and I had some other companies, I had been in supply. The difference was that I had a lot of people in between us and the farmer who were giving us a show and saying, like, well, this is what's going on. Look at how great this is. Look at all the resources we're providing. Look at there was a lot of smoke and mirrors to help other companies be able to tell a story without feeling bad about it, but still, again, sort of this hierarchical system benefiting from people, in what would be considered the beginning of the supply chain suffering for the gain of the end of the supply chain. Yeah. So in sitting with it, I think the biggest shift for me was in being able to say no. Because I had always said yes. I said yes to the model. I said yes to every retailer. I said yes to everything that didn't maybe make financial sense. I've said yes to things that I knew would potentially have an effect on somebody who I didn't know or was behind the curtain, right? And I think for me in this company, the saying no or being willing to say no or even being willing to fail completely, right? Because when we were just out raising our Series A for the last 2 years, we said no to a lot of the wrong partners. And that could have meant us going out of business. But I would have rather gone out of business and taken money from the wrong individuals who would move us in a direction that wasn't authentic to what it was that and what it is that we're building. So I think the most difficult part for me was changing all of the yeses into nos or to walking away or saying this isn't enough or instead of going along to get along, which also is a really deep hallmark for women in business, right? We're expected to be agreeable. We're expected to do whatever we're asked. We're expected to be nice. We're expected to be presentable and kind and positive all the time. And I had a moment where I said to myself, it's not about yes anymore. It's not about being nice anymore. And that's not me being a jerk. That's about me telling the truth and being authentic to something that's different. If we really want the regenerative outcomes that we all claim that we really want, it means that it's ugly and messy sometimes, and it's not simple. So it's not go along to get along anymore. It's sometimes like stepping away from the pack and saying, myself and my team spend 6 months of the year on the ground. And you brand who's never been on the ground are saying one thing, and we're here to tell you that the reality of that is not true, right? You are taking a soundbite. Let's all operate from a place of truth and integrity if we're going to actually change this. If any of this is going to be meaningful in the next 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 years, then it has to start somewhere, and it may as well start here.
So listening to you, I wanted to ask where you're sourcing your will to say no, because I'm imagining that it's more than, like you said, there's a moment. So like there is a moment of epiphany that happened, but I am guessing that it's also like many, many moments after that where you have to like dig deep and be willing to do that. And I feel like what you just spoke to is like in part answers my question of like you're really looking at the big picture and the long term. I'm curious to hear more about that process for you, because I think that you demonstrate a kind of, you've really made a deep impression on me, Heather, in our shared work in the food space for your unique courage and boldness and boundaries and just like what you just spoke to. Like I've seen that in action so many times, and it's part of why it's so impactful is because it is so unusual. And so I'm really curious to dig into like, how is it that you do that? And like, what's the process for you? What have you had to develop in yourself? And is it like, has it become easy now to do that? Is it second nature? What's the journey and experience of like turning the false yeses into nos that uphold authenticity and integrity?
So I'm going to be kind of vulnerable here for a minute, because I don't think like standing from a place of doing this for a couple of years and kind of being like, you just got to like pull it up and do, like, I'm not going to give you guys a motivational talk. I'm going to say that I'm over 40, which helps. Because I think when you get over 40, I was just talking with a friend about this the other night over dinner. Once you hit 40, you realize that you're in halftime. You're at the second half, right? You're going to the second half. And in the second half, you have to ask yourself questions like, what do I really want this to be? What do I want my mark on the world to be? And do I really care as much about what people think about what I'm doing or what I'm saying? Or if I come from a place of authenticity and truth, like, does that feel better than faking something? Because I think, for women, especially in, I think everywhere, I think for women, again, we are expected to be a certain way. We're supposed to do certain things. And I think a lot of women who get over 40, I hear this collectively from a lot of my friends over 40 who are like, yeah, no, like 40 happened. And I was just like, later.
I'm with you.
Like,
I'm with you.
Here. I'm here. I'm going. I'm doing like it or not. Like I've only got so much time left, and I want to leave it better than I found it, which is also a core tenet of regeneration and reciprocity. Leave it better than you found it. Do something, anything. Those early days in this, and still sometimes were and are so uncomfortable. I think that also, unconscious bias plays into this. I think a lot of people think I'm resistant for the sake of being resistant because I'm a woman, and they think Heather Terry was an actress, so she just wants to be in the spotlight, so she's going to go up against us, and she's not going to be part of the pack and support it. And that's not what it is. I was an actress. I know how to speak on stage. Who cares? Like, I have a skill. Go cultivate yours. It's great. Like, I'm sorry if you don't have that skill, go find it. I mean, that's harsh, but like, it's the reality of the situation. I am a very good speaker. I honed that skill for many,
you are a very good speaker.
Years,
yes.
Right. Yes. And that happened because
I always feel intimidated being on stage with you. And now it makes me feel better knowing you're a professionally trained actor. Yes. Like, of course
I
you're
am
an amazing
professionally
speaker.
trained, but I spent a big chunk of my life cultivating those skills to be able to stand up and talk about these things in a way that is digestible, eloquent, like able to present to the outside world in a simple way, right? But it can be really hard. And yeah, there are definitely days, Megan, where I feel down about it. I know people criticize me. I know they have thoughts and opinions about me. But what I also know is that I look into the eyes of those farmers. I sit with them. I have meals with them. I am out running around with their kids, playing soccer, whatever, out in the middle of nowhere, some of the most inaccessible places in the world. I'm so privileged and lucky to have had the access to the communities that I have sat with, the Arhuaco, the Kogi, the indigenous tribes in Colombia and in Africa. I'm so privileged as a white woman to have been able to sit with those people and to hear their stories and to look deeply into their eyes and understand what the pain is and where the mistrust is and how much the system has failed them. And because I have that privilege, it is my responsibility to talk about it and to not go along to get along, no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter how hard it is, no matter how constant that feeling is. That is my responsibility because I've taken the challenge of doing it. I've said GoodSam is not going to be like every other company. The paradigm shift within our walls is one thing. Our culture within our walls is one thing that is totally different than any other company out there. My team goes to the field. Every single person on our team goes to the field, right? Because they need to be able to see why we're doing it. They need to be able to believe in why we're doing it, right? And we need to be able to inspire others to create the will to do it. You asked me about my will and what keeps me going. My grandparents were also farmers in Poland. They lived through World War II. My mother came here when she was 17. She swore her daughter would never work on a farm. She laughs in great irony around all of that, but they struggled too. And I grew up a little bit on that farm. My mom started sending me to Poland when I was 9, after communism broke in 1989. And I got to experience what poverty was at that level. And now I understand poverty in LATAM, in Africa. And by the way, by our farmers here in the United States, who we work in the Central Valley in California. We have formed a partnership with another farmer in Idaho. They're not living in the lap of luxury. I challenge anybody who's listening to this, who doesn't believe me, to go into their supply and sit with their farmers, see where they're living. Have you sat in their house? I've sat in their houses. I know what their house looks like. I know how little they have, even our farmers in the United States. That is a wake-up call. And that translates directly, Megan, into a statistic that should terrify all of us. The average age of a farmer worldwide is 65 years old. That right there, if you have no other motivation and you're in the food industry, if you have no other motivation to change something, we don't have young people on farms farming. So when those guys go out, who's going to grow food? There's no opportunity there.
What are your thoughts on for food brands who are in a place where they listen to this as like a nice story of something cool that you and your company are doing, but like they can't do it. It doesn't apply to them or like they don't even have any idea where to begin. Because like you're saying, you're charting this course of totally changing the paradigm. And so it requires like a deep reevaluation of how everything is done. And I can see how much it makes sense that people stay asleep, like how strong the temptation would be to like, in spite of a shocking statistic like that, our farmers are literally aging out. Who is going to be growing the food if we don't change this paradigm? That still for the typical business model mindset where you're just thinking about the quarterly earnings, that even something that clear, even when the writing on the wall is that clear, it still can like it's so tempting to just push it away, which is clearly what most companies are doing. What would you say to those brands? And like, what do you think is like a reasonable place to start from which the individuals in companies making decisions could start to shift their own mindset and source will in a new way, the way that you have?
Yeah, look, I think, maybe like 6 months ago, I would have had like a little bit of a different way to talk about this. But I think in the current political landscape, which is very, very challenging and will become more challenging on a lot of different levels, lots, like the complexity, what is it today, Megan? It's February 14th, 2025, that we're having this conversation. And so much has changed since January 20th already, right? And that those decisions are creating massive chaos in the whole agricultural system worldwide. Just because we make a decision here in the United States doesn't mean it just affects us in the United States. It affects the entire globe. Every time we make a decision here, it affects agriculture around the entire world. It is a massive ripple effect throughout this whole system. So like 6 months ago, I might have been a little bit more analytical about this, but today I'm going to be a little bit more emotional about it because I think that it is really important for us to dig deep and understand why we're doing the things we're doing. Why are you in this business? What do you want? How do you want to leave things? What do you want to be known for? Do you want it to be easier or do you want it to mean something? Like, what is it? Like, if you're in this industry with me and a lot of other colleagues, what are you trying to do and why? Right? Because if it's just to like cash out quick and just like whatever, I just want to take mine. Well, okay, great, go do that. But you're not going to last very long here. And by the way, that's such a small percentage of companies that can even do that anyway. So good luck. But if you want to do something that really means something and that can grow, we all have to recognize, yes, it is easier to stay asleep. That's easy. But even sleeping right now is going to be difficult because of all the challenges that are being put forth. So my next question then is, what can you do? Even if you're in an old structure or a structure that's difficult to move, there's always something that can be done. There's always some piece that can be moved and changed. And there's always some part of an organization that has the will to reconfigure, right? To something that is less extractive, more aware, develops consciousness, right? can be a catalyst for a larger change. Yeah. So where is that in the system that you're working in? It's hard, but again, what do you want? What do you want for your life? What do you want for yourself? What do you want for your kids? What do you want for generations of kids after you leave this earth? What do you want? That's, it's a hard look. It's easy to be kind of passe and say, whatever, I don't care. I just want like to feed my family and do this and that, except that you have to remember that we're setting the stage for the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. It's the thing we forget when we behave in a way that is irrational or chaotic, right? And especially in the United States, where we have a tremendous amount of influence everywhere. When we operate from that place, we actually disenfranchise, we destroy, we dismantle pieces that then have to be cleaned up later. And we're in that time.
A lot of what I hear and what you're pointing to is like how important it is to be able to see interdependence and like nested holes, not only in space, but in time. Like that and I think that is, really at the root of really like all elements of the polycrisis is individual humans fragmenting themselves, their lives, their choices out of the reality of the ripple effects it has in space and in time, like you're pointing to for future generations. What is the impact of this? And it does, to your point about even being asleep right now is uncomfortable. I really see that too, that like the fact is everything is interdependent, and whether or not we're willing to be awake and really look that truth in the eye and engage with it constructively, we're impacted by it. So if you're acting like you're a fragmented, isolated entity, that's painful because it's not true. And then it also comes with not taking responsibility with the truth of that. And so in this all, I'm thinking a lot about our shared work together in Renourish Studio, and which for those who aren't familiar is an amazing school of living systems thinking in the lineage of Carol Sanford. And I remember actually the first Renourish event that we were at together, Heather, and I don't know if we'd ever even spoken before. We're sitting at the same table and I overheard you talking about the non-GMO project to someone else, and you were like, I didn't know you yet. And like your like uniquely forceful personality and like going back to the social conditioning of women, like I overheard you talking about how like the non-GMO project had just become this like thing that you had to do. And I will like totally own like the way that like female social conditioning played in. Like I was like, oh my gosh, that must be a criticism. Right. And I was like, does she know I'm at this table? I know this is a funny thing to admit to you. I've never told you this. Now I'm telling everyone. Yeah. And like, I look back to that and it just like captures a lot for me. I want to talk about Renourish and get back to that. But I also just wanted to share that of like your, like actually what I then came to realize after I got to know you more was actually like an incredibly supportive comment about the non-GMO project.
Yes. It was.
But how like, yeah, the idea of like, oh, I did something that people feel like they have to do, that must be a problem. And I think that's pretty telling about our social conditioning of women in this culture where I've been, this is something I've worked on for 20 years. And like, of course I want people to feel like it's an important thing to do. But still like, again, I'm just relating to that, the ongoing development of like holding the line and standing for things and how uncomfortable that is when we're conditioned to just make things comfortable for everyone else. And I think that's really at the root of also this paradigm shift and remembering our interdependence is it's uncomfortable to change. And to be a woman standing for that is extra uncomfortable. So yeah, again, I'm just inspired by your example, and I'm curious because you obviously understand a lot about the true nature of regeneration from your firsthand experiences on farms. But then you also chose to come into Renourish Studio, and I'm curious how participating in the studio has transformed your thinking, and also anything that you want to offer about your thoughts between the work that we do there about understanding regeneration as a paradigm and a mindset versus like a certification or a set of agricultural practices.
Yeah, it always makes me laugh when people are like, yes, regenerative is 5 principles of soil. And I'm just like, no, it's not. Because it is and it isn't, right? Like it is so much, like you can't have those principles of soil without expanding that beyond soil, period, full stop. Like it doesn't work. It's virtue signaling. It's BS, right? So we were struggling in that we didn't have a cohort of other individuals and companies that were thinking about these things. And that was really hard for us. I've always been on primarily the food side, and brands kind of become a little insular, or brands are just kind of sitting with brands, kind of complaining about all the things that are going on. It's like, I'm not interested in that anymore. Again, I think it's like kind of getting over a certain age and also getting a little outside of myself to say, yes, I own a company. Yes, I have responsibilities, but this is not just about me and my company. This is about so much more. So we were, for me, I had really great people in the business and still do that hold me really accountable, that we work together to really set the stage, the strategy, the direction of where we're going and how we're thinking and how the thinking continues to change and evolve over time. But we were struggling in that we didn't really have a cohort or a group of people who we could think with, that we could bounce ideas off of, that we could say crazy things or say, I am totally confused about this. Like I thought I had an idea or we thought we had something that was going to work and it didn't. And, I think when Lauren Tucker came and invited me to Renourish and invited the company to Renourish, I said yes right away. I didn't even know what the heck it was. I had heard her speak on a panel and I thought, oh my God, I need more people who talk like this. Like we're talking like this. We need people to talk to us like this. We need people to stretch us, people to question us, people to challenge us, people to collaborate with us, to agree with us, or to say we agreed about that last week, but now we have this new piece of information. We're blowing all that up too. And that's what the studio is. I think that, I come from an acting background, as we covered, but, I told Joel and Lauren and Adam and Trevana very early on that I felt like it was a lot like the actor studios. There were all these schools of acting in the at the turn of the century. And what happened was that these groups of people came together to work on these methods, and essentially modern day screen and stage acting is a product of those studios, right? What we watch on TV all the time or on our iPads or our devices, and what we see on stage is a product of those individuals and that deep, deep work that they did, workshopping and thinking and trying things and developing method, right, in order to tell stories. And we're sort of doing the same thing at Renourish Studio. We're taking frameworks and shifting different layers of the paradigm, and some things work and some things don't, and some things are terribly confusing. And sometimes I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I understand that thing Megan Westgate said 7 months ago when we were on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, because it is that deeply thought provocative, I think. And I think for companies out there that are doing this type of work, joining something like the studio becomes something that is really important to the deeper thinking and the development of their projects, whether it be a company or some other creative pursuit that they're putting out into the ecosystem. So, that's why we joined it, and that's why we continue with it. And we do really deep work with them as well individually. And it's been really central to what happened at GoodSam, which, eventually ended up in really our governance and also in the way that we decided to raise money. You know, the way that we constructed the Series A financing that we're just now completing, which will be announced in a couple of weeks, was not the easy path at all, but it was worth it.
I want to hear more about that. I'm also noticing in what you're saying, like the theme of the not knowing and the questions. And that's something that I so deeply value about my experience in the studio also, and how, you know, it's another part of the paradigm that needs to shift, is that we're all conditioned that being successful means having the answers, knowing what will work, doing it right. And all of that takes out any room for evolution and development that we absolutely need to have. Like, clearly we look around, like business as usual is not working. And so if we're not willing to grapple with very difficult fundamental questions, which, you know, you've pointed to in your journey, a big part of the effort has been saying no instead of yes. And I would imagine it's also that grappling with the uncertainty and the not knowing, and because you have to figure out a whole new way to do it. And that's a capacity that I think in our schooling and in our society and in our business world is like really underdeveloped. Because again, like the gold stars, the A's, the kudos go to the ones who have the answers. But what about the good questions that we have to be asking? And so I think having community where we're supported and valuing the really good, hard questions, the not knowing that is the edge of finding new paradigm, is so invaluable. And I'm curious like in your willingness to grapple with that, like how did that show up in your Series A funding efforts or in other endeavors since you joined the studio?
You know, I've always been like a doer, and I've always been let's get it done kind of person. And I think, you know, let's get it done. Let's get to the other side. Let's get the answer. Let's go. I'm a Virgo, Megan. So I'm a person who gets things done, and I'm not too cute about it either. Right. So, you know, I think you're right. We are in a culture that celebrates expert. It celebrates, people who bark the loudest, in particular men, who bark the loudest. I think that what I've learned in all of this, that it's actually more interesting to say, I'm not sure, I don't know, let me think about it, let me get back to you. You know, to take some time to slow it down, because when we think about regeneration, systems regeneration, long-term outcomes of regeneration, or the actions that we're doing now that are going to live in these systems long after we are gone, we don't know. We don't actually know. And I think that was very humbling for me. You know, I get on podcasts like this and I talk a lot, but my team jokes because when we're in the field, I'm really, really quiet. When I'm on farms, I'm really, really quiet. I listen to everything that everyone is saying to me. I'm in deep, active listening, trying to understand. I'm trying to set my preconceived notions aside. I'm trying to set my solutions mindset aside and say, listen and think. Because if it was an easy answer, it would have already been done. Right? Yeah. It's never that easy. And so, you know, I think in the Series A, it was, you know, look, we started that Series A 2 years ago, and only 2% of all VC money goes to women in general. I knew it was going to be hard. It was extremely hard to raise capital in this environment, and the amount of capital that we raised will be surprising to a lot of people too, which is exciting. And also, you know, a testament to how we had to do it. So we went out to traditional VC and PE. That was where I was from, right? These were all the people that I knew in the natural products industry and consumer goods, in the CPG landscape. And I was hopeful that they would get behind me because I was a known jockey, right? Like I've led multiple businesses. People knew me, people liked me, and the CPG community said no, or they gave us very sharky term sheets that I said no to. That was a big eye opener, and I was really forlorn at the end of 2023. I had gotten my butt kicked. I felt like the whole ecosystem had given up on me, that I could never raise a dollar. I was like, is this because I'm a woman? Which statistically, there's part of that is true, right? It just is. Conscious or unconscious, doesn't matter. Capital is not flowing through to women in the system, period, full stop. I like, you can, anyone out there can argue with me all day on it, but the numbers don't lie. Numbers are black and white. They don't lie. Women are undercapitalized. So I met a guy at SoCap, which is a investor conference that is very focused on impact. And he was a guy who grew up really close to me in Chicago, Greg Krupa, who came into the business and had a totally different network. He was very well networked in the impact community. And I met him, and he called me about 8 weeks after I met him. And he had been running an NGO, and he was a social mission entrepreneur, had raised a lot of money in the system over the 15 years he had been doing his own projects. And he said, look, I am winding down this project that I've been working on, and I've just been thinking about you. Like, I think that what you're doing is spectacular, and I think your team is amazing, and I want to help. I want to get in there with you. I want to open up my whole network of investors to you and figure out how we can get these impact investors that have historically really invested in the system versus like an off-taker or a consumer goods company like you, to help them understand how important this piece is and how a lot of their capital should be funneling to companies like yours. And that's what we did. And so almost all of the money that GoodSam has raised on this Series A has been from impact investors, primarily in the global South, not American. So it's very, very different. It's also a testament to how global we are. It's a testament to how we're just human. We're human, and we're all working toward the same goals. And we've got to work together to solve these problems. It was a really, it's been a really amazing experience working with these kinds of investors. They're more patient capital. They understand what we're doing. I have thanked several people who said no to me, or who wrote me a really bad term sheet. And I was like, thank you for doing that. Cause I had the courage to say no. And you put something in front of me that you probably even knew I would say no to, or you just said no outright, and you forced us into the right place, because I had to get really creative, and I'm grateful for that. But it was different.
I am excited to learn more about that, and yeah, it makes me think about one of our frameworks in the studio of the law of threes, and just valuing restraining forces, and just how often, how true that is that things that seem like obstacles in the moment, even like paralyzing obstacles, actually can turn out to be some of the most like game-changing, important pieces that
100%.
Support us on our journey. Yeah.
No question. And I'll tell you, like, if you ask Lauren and Joel and different people in the studio about like 2 years ago, when I was talking about the capital raise and the evolution of that, right, to where it is now, I mean, it was such an expansion for all of us at the company to think differently about those people coming into our company and sharing a part of our company and helping us expand. I issued to our friends at Whole Foods Market, like, because we do a lot of business with Whole Foods, a whole list of things we have to report on. And they were like, whoa, just like, because these investors care so deeply about the work that we do on the ground. They care so deeply because they really believe that finance is connected to those outcomes in a way that should be positive and meaningful, and not just, again, for virtue signaling or for marketing, right? They really believe that there has to be sustenance there. There has to be truth and meat, in that reporting, and to be able to really track it over time, that the energy of that money coming in has got to flow through those outcomes, right? It can't just be there to, just make more money. It's got to have more of an objective than that. And that's also just a very different way of thinking about investing money, putting money into your company, survival, all those things. And to your point, so many of these concepts are so deeply connected, and we forget that sometimes.
It's so interesting how impact investing is its own separate thing. And I guess especially from food, like just what started as the health food industry before it was even an industry, just the little health food co-ops that has now grown into, we're getting ready to go to Expo West with whatever 80,000 people there, biggest natural products trade show. And it's not necessarily supernatural. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. But it's just interesting because I think for some of us, like you and I, like we're tracking to this imperative that food should nourish life. And like what bigger, like when you talk about impact, it's like the ultimate impact is like, is life being nourished? And I think of like, of anything, the food, quote unquote, industry, but like fooding is so directly connected to that impact. And so it's really interesting to hear about your experience of like, well, on the ground in the way business is being practiced right now, the focus is largely just on the money. And like you had to go to a whole separate community focused on impact to have it be valued that what you are doing in your way of fooding is about more than making money. And that just feels like there's so much potential, especially for the natural products industry, to come back into relationship with like, we have this privilege of working on something that is so directly tied to the most existential things of our time, of like food nourishing life. Like food is, if we change the way that we grow and make and eat food, it has the power to transform like most of the things that are destroying life right now. And I'm excited about the example that you're setting, and also like curious what might unfold if impact could be more of a consideration in food industry investment.
I love what you just said, though. You said, is food nourishing? And then I just thought to myself, like, who is it nourishing for? So like, even when we think about a company like a GoodSam that is putting out a nourishing product, okay, so I'm putting out a nourishing product to a customer, but am I taking care of my employees? Am I taking care of myself? Am I taking care of my farmers? Are they taking care of the land? Is the food nourishing all the way down to the land? And is the food nourishing through its capital investments, right? So when the money comes in, the idea is for the money to grow, but does that money grow because it's extractive, or does it grow because it's actually nourishing something, because it's actually building and developing something, right? Like dead money, right? Really extractive money, bad deals where founders get screwed. There's no good energy in that. There's no good outcome in that. It's flat, it's extractive. Yeah, maybe somebody makes a lot of money, but what happiness is in that? How many executives I know in the food industry who will remain very, very nameless, who have a lot of money but not a lot of happiness, right? Because they're, I was talking with one of my team members. We have a lot of foreign employees, and with everything that's going on in the political landscape, and visas and passports and countries and jumping from place to place, there was a lot of fear in the system. And it relates to this is food nourishing piece too that we're talking about. But I said to this individual, I said, remember, no matter how hard it gets, no matter how extractive it gets, no matter how scary it gets, the good guys always win. Like think of every movie we watch, think of every story we read. You're not rooting for the bad guy. And look, it might last for a little while, 3 years, 11 months, and however many minutes we have left, but the good guy always wins. Good will always win. It's like, it's a universal principle, right? It always comes around in some way. And so we have to remember that, like, just because we've done the food system in this way for so long doesn't mean that it can't change. It doesn't mean that we can't just say, you know, we're not going to do this anymore. Just as easily as we set it up, we can deconstruct it and replace it. It's a fact.
Yeah.
We made all of this up. We made up free fills. We made up, some of the certifications. We made up a lot of this stuff, right? So you can take the good from that and put it into a new system, and we can let go of the bad. It's going to take some time, but the good guys will always win.
My way of thinking about that is like, in a way, like the idea of the good always winning feels connected to life winning, and like the truth of nature and existence fundamentally is like it regenerates. Yes. And like life keeps living, and that's why I think that is like the good winning. That's where it feels truest to me, is when I track to like when I am in service of life, when I'm tracking to that, totally. Like that always wins. So Amen. Like that's the team to be on.
I love that. I'm totally using that. I'm stealing that from you. No, it is though. I mean, I think we all have to remember that, because these are really weird times, and it's scary too. It's scary to make a move. It's scary to still talk about, right now it's scary to talk about DEI and diversity and justice. It's scary to talk about all those things because there's leadership that is telling us that there will be consequences to continuing that work, but the good guys always win. We got to remember that.
One of the ways that we've been talking about that at Non-GMO Project is like, it's just that regardless of mandates or lack thereof from on high, it's like, again, it's tracking to integrity of like, it's in order for our work, our mission, our efforts to thrive, like we have to be considering everybody. And that's like humans and the more than human community of life. Yes. And this is back to this idea of like life. Like we have a responsibility. And you spoke at the beginning of this conversation about your privilege of the spaces that you've been in, and like how you can't, like what I heard and what you were sharing is like the responsibility that comes with that privilege. Like once you're awake to that, once you feel those connections, once you experience the interdependence of things, you can't turn away from it. And it's not about like having a special program or not having a special program. It's the commitment of, for each of us as individuals, how are we showing up every day in a way that considers the well-being of all? And just like, I think that the infinite source of will, really, that's there of like, when you make choices that come from integrity with respect for life, it is an unstoppable force that you're aligned with.
100%. 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's the part that when we get stuck in the matrix, when we get stuck in the rules, when we get stuck in this is the way it has to be, right? We forget that. But that is, to your point, Megan, such a universal force.
I'm curious, as we wrap up, if you have, like, with all that in mind and, the acknowledgement of that it's a particularly challenging time right now, any thoughts that you want to leave people with of, the title of this podcast being Future Kind, and we're exploring the question of like, how do we become the humans the future needs? And you've touched on that in a lot of ways. For anyone, or could be specifically for food industry folks, doesn't matter. Like, what's your best piece of advice in this moment of top of mind of like, what is imperative for us at this time to become the humans the future needs?
Action of any kind. Action of any kind. And I think because I hear so many people, again, just default to we're not set up that way. We can't do that. It's very uncomfortable. But there's, again, it's like Michelle Obama at the DNC, like, do something, right? Everyone can do something. There is something somewhere in your organization, your life, like, even if the only thing you can do as a human is just compost, right? Get a Lomi, go do a compost service, start composting in your backyard, learn, get it cheap, expensive, who cares? Just do something. If that's the one thing, do that one thing, right? But don't lie asleep or apathetic, or even worse, complain and do nothing, right? Because then that makes us become the generation or the period of history that was unable to do anything. And we have to do something right now. So be a part of the solution in one way or another. There is a way, either individually in your business or together. Even if you're not in the food industry and you're listening to this, like I said, compost, do something, urge somebody in your office to do something. That creates the energy of will, right? When you start to do something and you inspire others around you and it starts to snowball, and suddenly you're like looking at it 3 years later going, oh my God, everyone in my cul-de-sac has their compost buckets out. This is so great. I wonder how much we've kept out of a landfill. Like, that's something. We did something. It's not a big something. And how many people did they tell about it? And I wonder what that one comment at a dinner party got me. It really is so meaningful. But we all can do that. And, one of the things that I've also in my whole career really been very passionate about as well, Megan, is how do you spend your money? Who do you spend your money with? Make sure that the companies and the people that you're supporting with your money are in alignment with your values. And that's not always possible, right? Sometimes there are extraneous circumstances, but if you can spend the majority of the money that you make and that you spend on companies and within organizations who are doing the right thing, then you are also sending a message to the companies that aren't, that you will not accept what they're doing. And you're sending a message to the companies that are to continue going and to fight the good fight.
That's such a good reminder. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for everything that you've shown us in this conversation about being willing to grapple with questions and say no. Because I think that there's just that practice too of it could show up in all kinds of ways. Yeah. But how in our days are we staying awake to really staying with the questions, and when we feel a no, honoring that and standing for things with integrity in the way that you do so beautifully. So thank you so much, Heather, for being with us and for everything that you do.
Well, thank you, Megan. You've been such an inspiration to me in my career too. Everything that you've done. I'm so grateful to know you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Future Kind. Remember, every choice we make ripples through the web of life. Until next time, stay curious, stay conscious, and keep making future kind choices that nourish yourself and our world. Future Kind is brought to you by the Non-GMO Project and the Food Integrity Collective. New episodes emerge with every new and full moon. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform and share your Future Kind moments with us on social media using #FutureKind. Music by Yaima, Masaru Higasa, and Pepper Proud. Rise Ceremonia 6.